Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Eric Helms and Brad Loomis as we discuss the methods, mechanics, and purposes of cardiovascular training for many different types of athletes. Because we're natural bodybuilding coaches, the bulk of this conversation revolves around contest prep athletes and how we personally work with them towards achieving their fat loss goals. We also touch on how we personally prescribe this type of training to our athletes, in what amounts, and with what types of modalities we prefer them to use. We go over a lot of answers to commonly asked questions as well, such as high-intensity interval training versus low-intensity steady-state cardio, whether we think running is a good idea, how we would program cardio for powerlifters, and how we even use body weight and barbells to achieve certain results within the right context for some types of athletes. This is a very in-depth and valuable conversation for many different types of lifters. It will cater to those who are looking to make things simpler by reviewing some basic principles, while also catering to those who must do cardio but are kind of bored or stagnant with their current routine and want to find different and appropriate ways to mix it up. So as always, hope you enjoy this episode. If you find this content valuable or have suggestions on future topics, pretty please let us know on social media. We are at Team 3DMJ on Instagram and Twitter and all that good stuff. We also have tons of separate individual coaching accounts. So just kind of search the hashtag Team 3DMJ or 3DMJ and you'll find us all over the place and let us know what you think. So here it is, our conversation all about cardio with Eric Helms and Brad Loomis. Let's start with the first one that everyone is HIIT versus LISS. Do y'all feel like there's a set of 10 questions that everyone asks and that's like number one?
That's definitely up there.
Yeah.
Well, what's your number one, Helms?
I don't know. They're all very, very common. Okay. I think a lot of them are related to the type of cardio or the intensity of the cardio, though.
Word. All right. So, do you want to kick off with the purpose of cardio for a contest prep athlete?
Yeah, we could start with that. I think that's
most obvious.
I think, there's obviously confusion around. Sit down, cat.
Around why cats are in this podcast all the time.
Around why Milo needs to walk across me only when I'm on Skype. He's back up. So I think the purpose of cardio is sometimes the source of confusion in this discussion. I think for those listening, for a bodybuilder, a pure physique athlete, cardio is just there to burn calories. And for other people, obviously, there's other roles for it. It may be for performance or what have you. But for a physique athlete, it's just there as a dieting aid, which I think is a good way to look at it.
Right. And going forth from that, people would say, if it's a dieting aid, do you have to do it? And how much does it aid complementary to the deficit created by calories? Could you eat a lot more and do a whole bunch of cardio? Or could you not do any cardio and eat a lot less? That's like the immediate, if we continue with the black and white thinking theme, which I know we don't agree with, but that's the immediate argument I get back is like, well, if it's only to burn calories, couldn't I just eat less and not have to go do cardio?
Mm-hmm. So there's some theoretically, yes. Practically and actually not theoretically, no. And here's why. So I'll start with the practical concerns. Cardio doesn't burn as much as people think it does.
Yeah.
The machine at the gym that's telling you how much it's burning, probably even your heart rate monitor, especially deeper into prep, and the more efficient and trained you get with that cardio, you're burning less calories than you typically think. Most of the time, we're burning, depending on the intensity and the size of the individual. Well, no, depending on the intensity, it's somewhere between, like, say, 3 to 7 calories per minute for most people. If you were a badass athlete crushing it, you might be able to get up as high as 10 calories a minute, but that's typically not. That might be more like an endurance athlete who's well-trained going at, the top end of their aerobic threshold. But we're talking about bodybuilders. They're not going to be burning that many calories. because you only burn about 3 to 7 calories per minute doing cardio, depending on body size, you're not burning nearly as much as you think, and you have to do a tremendous amount to create a deficit. And I think what people forget is that's not calorie burn in addition. That's calorie burn that's replacing other calorie burn. Like if you do an hour of cardio, your day doesn't all of a sudden have 25 hours, right? If you did an hour of cardio, and let's say you burned 5 calories per minute, but in that hour normally you were just walking around or grocery shopping or sitting around your house, that's replacing 2 to 3 calories per minute. So it's really only an additional like 2 to 4 calories per minute that you're burning to your day because you're replacing calorie burn that you would have otherwise had. I think what a lot of people do is they see, oh, I'm on the elliptical. It said I burned 400 calories. That's a 400 calorie deficit today that I've just created. That's not the way it works. So that's one of those practical issues that people don't think about. You can't just subtract your calorie burn. It's like if we prescribe someone 500 calories of cardio per week, they're not really getting 500 calories of cardio in. It's maybe 350 at most, in addition to an actual deficit.
Right. And then the purpose of prescribing it in that manner is so that we can keep it consistent, so we can create baselines to change off of, to create feedback loops that mean something to us, stuff like that. Not because we are trying to see how much food with the, like, not that because we're trying to burn 500 calories, we can give you that much more food.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think for some athletes, it gets attractive, the idea of being able to eat more. But they forget that there is a cost to doing cardio. It is training. Maybe at the very, very lowest intensities, it won't have any kind of recovery cost. But if you are doing a ton of moderate intensity and higher cardio, that'll definitely interfere with your ability to retain muscle mass. And we have plenty of research on the quote-unquote interference effect, where the cardiovascular adaptations interfere with your ability. Not that they make you regress, but they make it less effective, your ability to get adaptations from weight training, which you don't want.
Right. And let's, I'm going to kind of sideways this to Brad and you. Like when you start a prep athlete who has, well, I guess that brings up another question. Would it be ideal to start a prep athlete who has not been doing cardio at all? Perfect situation. When you get an athlete who's been training for a long time, would you like them to have no base with cardio? Do you have zero preference? Do you ask them to do less than a certain amount? Brad, do you have any preferences there?
I would say that my preference, or at least I really start to drool when people are not doing any cardio at all. And it just simplifies things. It makes it so much easier, because then when we program diet, once we figure out maintenance, we can say, okay, if we want to lose half a pound a week, we go into a 1,750 calorie deficit, boom, we go. And then we can use cardio as a tool to make the caloric deficit deeper. And I mean, like we were saying, it's always a matter of what you're comparing it to. Right. People all the time will say, well, what form of tracking should I use so that it's the most accurate? Well, it really doesn't matter. It's like Eric said, I mean, you really can't have the ideal tracking method for your cardio. We just need to quantify it in some way, shape, or form. Body knows that we weren't doing any. And now if we just say, okay, use the calorie tracker on the machine or the heart rate monitor or whatever, and let's burn 300 a week, that increases our deficit. And the body now knows that we weren't doing any cardio, and now it knows we're doing this much more. And that's really all that matters. And then we can just kind of always compare it. We can say, let's double it. Let's use the trackers and do 600. Now, are we actually doubling our calorie expenditure? No, but there's a recognizable difference from what we were doing and what we are doing now, or at least there will be over time. And so, yeah, I really drool over it when people are doing no cardio at all. And even my powerlifters, I really like it, because then if we need to make a weight class that we are trying to cut, usually with my powerlifters, I do like to try to just kind of compartmentalize my cardio into kind of like 6-week chunks. But still, there was none, and now there's this much, and that's a recognizable change. Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Eric?
Yeah, what Brad's getting at there is that it's basically the difference between validity and reliability in a scientific sense. So Something is valid if it accurately represents something else. Does the calorie tracker accurately represent how many calories you're burning? No. Is it reliable? Yes. All it does is it takes the time and multiplies it by the body weight manner based on some predetermined formula that the manufacturer has made. So you know that if you go from 300 calories to 600 calories, it's the same change as it would be if you went from 200. Well, that's not. But the point is, it's the same increment. It's the same amount wrong every time.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and that's why when people like to get fancy with it, when they're like, okay, well, I know you said 800 calories a week, and they started doing all of this on the elliptical at their gym. And then they, without letting us know, maybe then you decide I'm going to do 400 of it walking outside according to my Fitbit and 400 of it on the elliptical now. And and that's the information that we didn't know because, like you said, they're different measurements of off. If that makes sense, yeah. So I guess talking about modes like that, do you guys ever use anything besides machines? Like I just said, some people I know use calories on their like Fitbit or their whatever monitor they use. Any other modalities besides steady state machines, electronic things?
For the most part, so long as it's in terms of modality, not intensity, I guess a better way to put it is so long as they enjoy it. Yeah. That's the really only thing I care, and so long as they can be relatively consistent with the tracking. I think an important caveat is that only in rare instances is there a ton of cardio being done. So whether if you have 2 cardio sessions per week for a total of 600 calories, which isn't an uncommon place for some of my people to finish at.
Yeah.
Maybe a little on the low end. Do I really care if they switch from like the Fitbit tracking and walking to the elliptical? It will be different, but it's just it's a difference in a very small portion of where their deficit's coming from. So I think the most important thing is that they enjoy it. It doesn't stress them out. And I think modality becomes more important at higher intensities, but at a low intensity, I don't think it matters very much, so long as it's not boring and mind-numbing and making prep harder.
Interesting. I find that different with myself, but I prefer my athletes to stay the same. Not forever, but if it's like you like elliptical and treadmill walking, cool. If you decide you want that to be swimming and outdoor hiking, I just need to know kind of thing because it can matter.
I do like to know.
Yeah.
But again, that is conditionally important in my mind. If I've got a tiny little sedentary figure athlete who's 5 foot nothing, and we have to do a lot of cardio so I can actually keep them with enough calories to have fruits and vegetables and micronutrients in their diet, and they're doing 5 cardio sessions a week, then yeah, it becomes very important for it to be consistent. So I know that the data isn't fluctuating.
Right.
But if I've got a heavyweight male bodybuilder doing 2 sessions per week, I don't really care because the vast majority of his deficit is coming from the food.
Mm-hmm. Word. That's a good point. Okay, so I wasn't even thinking about size of the athlete and the fact that a male has a lot more just room to play with what they're eating than...
Yeah, you get less and less options when you're dealing with a female low and... Well, really anyone with a low TDEE, right?
Yeah.
So.
What about when you said it makes a big difference at higher intensities? Do you guys ever prescribe running, and in what instances? I get that a lot.
Perfect question. Perfect question. Yeah, and I'm like Eric in that I really don't care how it gets done. Just get it done. Because even if there is a difference between the way that we're tracking and the sources of the cardio, what's going to be the difference? It's going to be maybe 75 calories a session. You're doing a couple sessions a week. You're looking at 150 to maybe 225 calories. We're not even looking at hardly even an eighth of a pound of quantifiable body weight change. But your question kind of prompts questions in my mind. Mm-hmm. In probably, getting back to those top 10 questions about cardio that you were talking about, Andrea, at the very beginning of the podcast. I think the biggest question or concern that I get is that running is going to block my leg gains.
Mm-hmm. Well, not so much.
That's a huge question for me.
Yeah, I don't think of it as blocking leg gains so much as recovery because it has impact. When I think something that blocks leg gains or would kill, I don't know, I think something more like a Stairmaster or a, you know what I mean? Like climbing up the stair mill for, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. I would think, although that's less impact, that's more muscular work, I suppose, than running, but then that's
Right.
slamming.
Yeah.
And the joints
So
get, shitty in prep.
there's two things you basically want to avoid, and that is high impact stuff, which typically only happens when you're doing high intensity work. And then stuff like you're talking about, Andrea, where it generates a lot of local muscular fatigue that could interfere with your training. So, for example, like if you look at some of those studies and meta-analyses on these, cycling typically doesn't cause much of an issue. And if you think about cycling, you're always in a concentric phase, basically. You're never having to break yourself. The muscle's never lengthening under load. So there's much less muscle damage. So, and there's no impact. So it's kind of both taken care of at the same time. Now, obviously, this isn't like HIIT cycling where you're trying to just burn your shit out at a very high resistance. But just regular cycling doesn't seem to cause much of an issue. There's a cool study that came out of Zerdos's lab that I don't think is published yet, but it has been presented as an abstract, where they had people do basically additional low-intensity resistance training or traditional HIIT or steady-state cardio, and then looked at the ability to gain muscle or strength. And there were pretty minor differences overall, which is interesting to show that even adding additional resistance training volume wasn't beneficial. So you can kind of do too much, So, yeah, cardio, I think the practical stuff really does come into play. You just basically need to think about it like, all right, if my goal is to burn calories and not interfere with my weight training as a bodybuilder, then you just need to think about, okay, what activity would I want to avoid? Well, sprinting is probably the worst thing you could do. There's a really high injury rate, specifically hamstring tears and strains in trained sprinters. But in bodybuilders who don't know how to do that, sprinting is going to be tremendously more injurious. And also it is related to what caused the most of an interference effect. If someone really, really likes doing something, a small amount is not a problem though. Like if someone wants to run, they want to run once a week, I will not stop them if it's like, say, 45 minutes or less or something like that, I'm not going to prescribe it, but if it makes them happy and I think it's at a low enough dosage that it's not going to interfere, so be it. But if someone's like, hey, I want to run 3 times per week to prep, I'm going to say, hey, I actually think that would have a measurable detrimental effect on your contest prep, and I wouldn't advise it.
Yeah, so, Andrea, I got a question for you then.
Sure.
And again, this is kind of as one of my main questions, kind of specifically, I guess, to running. You're kind of the exact opposite. You're not dieting. You're training for performance. So if anything, you're eating at maintenance or above. I've always kind of thought as nutrition is kind of the trump card, for the invasiveness, I guess you might say, of running in impact type sports. You being, not dieting and doing a fair amount of running as part of your conditioning work, do you feel like that holds its weight? I mean, do you feel like nutrition is kind of the trump card, or do you feel like there are, some circumstances when you can't eat enough and it's still impacting you that much?
No, personally, we took some running out in the last 6 months or so because I'm not the best runner and it hurts my knees. If I do more than a mile, like somewhere around the 5 to 8 minute mark, anything above that, they start to bother me. Not so much during it, when I stop, and the next day. So if we do running lately, it's been usually either somewhere between 200 and 400s. Not distance, because that's sport specific. I don't actually need to go for more than like 5 minutes. And then we try to do it on Wednesdays and Saturdays, which are the day before my off day. If we do it during a workout or like say a Monday, when I do train the next day, it'll be something like, okay, you have 1 rope climb, run 100 meters, 5 front squats at 125, rest for a minute, and do it again for like 7 rounds. I don't ever like run miles. And when I do, it's more of a joint thing, even now. And could that be because I'm heavier? I don't know, because I'm dieted, obviously. Could it be because I'm not very efficient at it? Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to do with me, I guess, because my training load is so much higher than I would ever have a bodybuilder. Not just my training is high impact, right? My Olympic lifting is high impact. My conditioning, like I said, is wall balls, box jumps, like a lot of plyometrics. So it's not like strength training and running. It's like impact everywhere and running. So it's a little bit different for me.
It's a good question. Go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, so, and Eric, you can probably piggyback on this, is that, kind of you've answered my question, Andrea, in that really there's a certain point when nutrition is not the trump card when it comes to the impact and the impact of your
right.
program in general with regard to running.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily low intake, more so as you've created a body that is not well nourished, like that's in a weakened state in a lot of ways, right? Like your joints are not as WD-40, you know what I'm saying? Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I think because in bodybuilding, it's almost always is the case that nutrition for fat loss is the trump card, and for interesting reasons, because cardio is much less predictable as far as the deficit you're going to create. You might be, you can be crappy on an elliptical or a stair climber and it'll still spit out the same kind of, calories burned. If you're slumped over the machine, it's not the same amount though, right?
Right.
Likewise, if you're prescribing time and you're not paying attention to distance or intensity, that same amount of time might be burning less calories, if it's at a much lower intensity.
Yeah.
And also, like, to be fair, your NEAT, your non-exercise activity, can go down. And that can go down in response to you cutting calories. It can also go down in response to you doing cardio. But it's hard to know what the actual deficit created from cardio is from everything we based upon. But if you cut out food, that's pretty much a guarantee that that's what it is. You will. I've seen this as a coach, and I've seen it in the literature as well. That. More so just as a coach, really, that when I make reductions in calories, there's much more predictable weight loss. But sometimes you can see wacky stuff with a tremendous amount of cardio where people aren't really losing. Not that we do that as coaches ourselves, but more often someone will come to us and they'll be doing 6 sessions a week, and you're thinking, man, how are they not already losing weight, or why are their calories relatively low for that amount of activity? And it's not a set value, like the calories in macronutrients are.
Right. What my last prep, so Berto and I started, because I'm especially in prep a small female. We started me at 1,000 calories a week of cardio, whatever amount of macros. I kept that 1,000 calories a week for the first 6 of my 8 months and continued to lose due to, I would say, nutrition, but even the first 2 months, we didn't have to change my macros at all. It was crazy. Never mind. Long story short, what I know Berto did and what I've liked to do with my athletes is when we do hit a wall and there's just not a whole lot of hours in the day that I want to add extra sessions, is at the end of leg day, adding in cycle sprints. Is that something y'all utilize? I've seen it super effective not that I've been coaching as long as y'all, but in the few athletes I have used it with, it has really helped to not add much time while adding calorie burn, and doing it on leg day to try to keep their recovery in check. And it's not very impactful on the joints. Is that something you guys have utilized as well? Do you have other ways of implementing some type of higher intensity?
Yeah, I actually have done that before. It's rare. It's rare that I do that.
These are both with ladies, but the times that I've done it too is, like you said, they're not a lot of food, and I'm like, okay, we got to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I like the concept of it, and I like the concept of, okay, we've already kind of traumatized the legs from a weight training session. tacking on a short amount of HIIT that's obviously not been in place in prep until now. It's all of the destruction is all done in one session, and then we've got the whole rest of the time to recover, as opposed to breaking recovery with a quick HIIT session here or there.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's reassuring to hear that you do that as well, because I do it, but it's very rare. I mean, it's probably, maybe at most less than 5% of the time. And, the biggest reason is just because I'm fearful of how, first of all, reliable the amount of increased calories are that we actually are burning, and if it is going to affect weight loss, and more so just the recovery of the athlete. Is there going to be more of a hit on the recovery of the athlete than, we're possibly suspecting, even with the concepts that we have in place?
Right. Before we hear from Eric, I want to give out the prescription too, because I think it might have sounded worse than it is. Just to be safe, it's like a 15-minute session. You warm up for a couple minutes. You do 12 minutes of 45-second chill, 15-second as hard as you can. And then you cool down for a minute.
Exactly.
And that's it. The whole thing takes 15 minutes. I know I liked it a lot. And of course, I just used it on the couple of athletes that were females that didn't have a lot of food, but I wanted to get something else from them. That was, yeah. So it doesn't, I remember thinking, it's only 15 minutes, I can do it. And it was far more effective calorically than like when I sit my ass on a cycle. And it takes forever to get to 100 calories. That was a boat, right? What was that? Yeah. Okay.
No, that was me. I farted. Andrea, quick question. Yeah. Did you do that before or after your training sessions? Just out of curiosity.
I would do it right after.
Okay.
Right after leg
days. That's what I do,
yeah. Go ahead, Eric, with whether you've done something similar.
If you I think that. If you like don't. Brad, it's relatively rare, just not because it's a bad idea, but just because I think as a team we're very conservative with cardio. So the times when we are in a position where we have to prescribe HIIT is not a common thing. But basically now we're talking about the situation where, look, we've got to do more cardio. It's not ideal. It's just the nature of prep. Right. We have to rob Peter to pay Paul. But what's the least negative way of doing that? And I think there are a few strategies that are really smart. I will normally sneak in extra cardio pre and post workout, like a 10-minute list session pre can serve as a warm up. If they weren't doing it before, awesome. It's not going to negatively impact them. If anything, it could maybe help them warm up a little bit if they're lazy. Yeah. And then, I've also found, like you guys have, that if I've got a person training, let's say legs 2 to 3 times per week, adding in a HIIT session, especially if it's leg dominant, on one of their off days actually seems to cause more of a problem with recovery than just tacking it on at the end.
Yeah.
What Brad said, then you're getting a full night's rest, more food, and you're kind of lumping it all together. And if you're, which we typically do, programming a appropriate but conservative amount of volume during prep, then it shouldn't be problematic. So I've experienced the same thing as well. I will also sometimes just try to get someone away from leg dominant HIIT if they're experiencing stuff like that. Just getting a little more creative, like using the rower but with your feet on the ground. It's just kind of like a body thing. It looks pretty silly, but you just put like your knees up against where the foot pad is and you slide the seat all the way up.
Have you ever done these things? The arm cycles? I think those are funny too.
They're super inefficient. That's why I like the rower.
And the other thing that we had at OU, a rope mill. That stuff was sick too. These ones.
Those are nice, yeah. You can just endlessly pull rope, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have one of those in the gym in Reno. I've never seen anybody use it, but boy, it sure is a neat looking machine.
Oh, it's killer. There's also, did you know there's ski ergs now? Like it's a CrossFit thing now, where you're just like yanking downward. So instead of rolling this way. Anyways.
I'll also do complexes. That's another thing I haven't talked about yet, is I'll give someone like no more than 65 pounds. Like I'll give 65 pounds to like a 500 plus deadlifter,
Yeah.
And I'll give the bar to pretty much everyone else on down. And if they have access to a female Olympic bar, that's what I give to women. And then just have them do like 5 RDLs, 5 rows, 5 hang cleans, 5 overhead press, 5 front squat, dump it, and then rest and do it again. And that's why it's so important to be so light. So it is really just, a movement rather than something that's going to create soreness and muscle damage and interfere with training. It's a fun way to do things. I find lifters enjoy that because it's lifting weights while they don't necessarily like running or doing other stuff like that.
Yeah.
I myself do sometimes I do very light Olympic compounds. Like I'll just slap 10s on the bar, so it's 40 kg at most, and I'll do like 3 hang snatches and stuff like that, 3 jerks, 3 power jerks, and a couple overhead squats and dump it if I want to do cardio.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I just feel like... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask Eric, because I've used that before, especially in athletes that don't do a lot of movement prep before their training. What would you speculate, just like a quick 15-minute session like that would burn calorie-wise per minute in just like your average size individual, like, myself or you?
I think, well, we're a little bit different size, my friend, but
I would like, yeah.
He just called you small. Get mad at him. Get mad at him. He called you small.
Either that or I've gotten really fat. You guys didn't know it.
There's like a 25-pound difference in our stage weight. So, but but that's mainly because I'm taller than you. I'm 6 feet tall, so it's not like a diss. Yeah, but
diss. Oh my God, I haven't heard that in so long.
Diss. So it really depends on the work to rest ratio. If someone's resting a long time, it doesn't burn very much. But if it's reasonable, like a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 work to rest to work ratio rather, then it burns a fair amount of calories. I'd say for someone my size, maybe 7 calories a minute. For someone your size, maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know. Because the reason I ask is that I'll actually do that for some of my athletes that don't do a lot of movement prep. And the only drawback is that I found out that it kind of blows my diet programming out of the water a little bit. They actually start dropping weight a little bit faster than I would like. And so obviously then the question arises, well, how many calories are they really burning, doing a 10-minute, 15-minute warm-up session like that? Because I was thinking aggressively. I was thinking like 10 calories a minute. Okay, it's 150 calories. It's 3 times a week, or, however many times they're training. I'll use that as part of my diet programming, and the times that I've done it, it almost ends up being that I have to add food back in later on in prep.
Good to know. No, like whenever I have.
To be fair, and sorry to interrupt, that it could actually be it. Sometimes I find people get extremely lethargic and lazy during prep and don't really realize it, and they start. I think they take more to warm up. But at the same time, they don't want to warm up because they're already tired. And if you look at some of the data on dynamic warm-ups, they can actually have a small performance enhancement effect. And you would imagine that would be slightly even more in people who are like really not warmed up. So it may be that their actual training becomes a little more exuberant, if you will, after they're doing the cardio you prescribed, and they're not going through their sets and reps like a zombie. So that could be, it has kind of a effect on the whole, everything that comes after it, for all I know.
One thing I was going to say is I've done, like if I go do 200 calories on an elliptical, while this Fitbit is on me, this will say I've done like 160 or 170. I don't know. That was a random fun fact. I wanted y'all to know that they're that far off of each other. Anyways, the other thing I was going to say. Huh?
I just for my own clarification, so your Fitbit says that it burns 160, 170. What does the elliptical say you burn?
Like 200, 210, something like that. Like they're real far off.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
So it's like 80% of the other?
Sure. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to, I guess an observation, was off-season females always want to do cardio, where I find that off-season males give zero shits. Is this something that you guys also find as well?
Yes.
Okay. I also find that they become more bored with lists in the off-season, whereas they prefer it in prep. So I have off-season ladies who I actually have done like body weight circuits for, or I'll say, I want you to do, 2 minutes of elliptical as fast as you can, 2 minutes at like 5 out of 10, 2 minutes fast as you can, and then get to 300 in that manner. And they like, for whatever reason, that's way more funsies. But I agree. I'm the same way. So those are things that I've noted, is the gender thing, and then that in prep, when I add or take away or whatever, the list is fine with everybody, but off season they get bored with it. But they want cardio. How do y'all feel about that? Is that the same thing for you guys? Do y'all notice that as well?
For me, it comes down to for me, it comes down to my first thought is why? Why does it change? So sometimes that is actually indicative of a greater coaching point of a person who's afraid of getting fat in the off season, so they want to keep cardio in. So normally that, we'll obviously negotiate and do what makes them feel secure. But that's something I think to address. Like I have met a lot of women who say they enjoy doing cardio in the off season, but a lot of the times it comes down to the fact that they're worried about that fat gain and they're trying to delay it. And the times they bring it up are shortly after I increase calories.
Okay.
Like, hey, I would really like to start doing some cardio. I'm like, okay, So yeah, I think it is good to give people what they want, but also be aware and help them towards what they need, So.
Right. Maybe that is because I'm a female. If someone wants to do 1 or 2 sessions a week, I will never fight them on it. If they want to do like 1,000 calories, I'm like, what? But if they want to do, and a lot of times the way it's either truly delivered or just masked in the delivery is, I just feel fat and slow without it, which I could believe, because I would feel that way now if I didn't. Brad, what about you?
Well, with terms of in-prep cardio, I mean, let's face it, we're tired, we're starving. If coach tells me that I'm going to have to do such and such an amount of cardio, naturally I'm going to, sit on the recumbent bike and just pedal away while watching Netflix, Yeah. I think that's I would think is predominantly what a lot of our athletes do. And hence why a lot of our adjustments are through food, because how many calories can they really be burning, sitting on that recumbent bike, watching reruns of The Walking Dead. And then likewise on the flip side, and this is kind of both I guess a statement of what I do, and then Eric, kind of a question as well. A lot of my gals that want to do cardio in the off season when we're trying to improve, unless there's some burning desire to run a marathon or do something like that, I really like the barbell complexes. I really like having them do some sort of weight training, as part of their cardio. And so my question is, and maybe this is for both of you guys, Andrea, since some of your cardio kind of could cross over, into a side where it's no longer, it's more so muscle, gaining exercise than it is like true cardio. So Eric, when does that threshold kind of happen? Like if I am doing barbell complexes for a gal with a 45-pound barbell, or like with nickels on it, that's a little bit more strength training than it is cardio. When does that line occur?
I think it's best to just bring it back to the fundamental principle of specificity and overload. So, there was a study that was done recently by Dr. Lenicky in his lab, where they found novices who just flexed and as hard as they could and did like an air curl, gained muscle just as effectively as a group that was lifting with weights. If you haven't, so obviously if you gave barbell complexes to novices, they would, if that is overload, right?
Right.
I don't know that if you gave complexes to a well-trained individual that it would have much of an additive stimulus at all. If it would even be enough, and especially with them, they're not going to be going to failure. They're not going to be going heavy, and they're not going to be getting much recruitment out of it. So, your muscles contract during all movements, but not all movements make you hypertrophy. So,
right.
So I think, so that's the overload portion. The specificity portion is that, the way you challenge your body, that's the way it'll adapt. And I think there's a big difference between performance cardio, if you want to call it that, and cardio for a bodybuilder. Like kind of what you started with, a bodybuilder, the only goal is to burn calories. So you want to figure out the way that interferes the least amount with weight training that still burns an efficient amount of calories. For all other athletes, that's not really the concern. I mean, yeah, you might want to minimize the interference effect, but if Andrea has to do wall balls or plyos or all those things, she's caring much more about the plyometric effect in making herself have a better stress shortening cycle, or being able to better train at anaerobic threshold, or just having a better aerobic engine. Like, I think those things should all be seen as individual entities towards a specific adaptation versus, are they either muscle gain or fat loss? I think that's more of a paradigm of thinking that applies only to bodybuilding, really.
Right. The one other thing, and I was looking at it in my sheet is why I was looking down, I swear to God I was listening, is I do have, because I don't have, as many athletes under my belt as you guys, but I do have two where I feel like, because when I got them, they've been lifting, but it kind of like a boot campy, half squat kind of, like they trained, but not so,
body pump class.
Things like that. And so along with these people that want to do off-season cardio, a big thing that I think is missing from a lot of this is just personally missing from a lot of people who got into it straight for physique, is stability things. So we'll do things like, you have 5 rounds of minute plank, 30 walking lunges, 15 lying leg lifts. And so there's a calorie burn there, but it's more like push-up position shoulder taps. But it's like, how do we hold the weight of our body better? And when they say they want to do cardio a couple days a week, I see that as an opportunity and I look at their movements and I'm like, maybe they just learned on machines or just with light dumbbells, and I see them now trying to squat and barbell or whatever, and I'm like, you need to have a stronger base for the things that you want to do. So that's another way that I'll get them to have their not so exhaustive lifting day while still feeling like they're doing cardio and they're out of breath. But I find that that's really efficient for us, and it's been really good for us, those couple of athletes that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. I know that's not an actual, I don't know if that fits in with this podcast topic, but I thought y'all might want to know that.
Well, yeah, it does. It does. And really, I mean, just listening to both of you guys, I mean, I just think about, my head is like almost swimming with the infinite amount of tools that could apply to varieties of vast different athletes. It's like, okay, this 500-pound, squatter, deadlifter, or strength athlete, for them to do barbell complexes, we're going to classify that as cardio. Yet, this 90-pound, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, that was the chili. The 90-pound little guy or gal that just got into weight training, doing barbell complexes, while it is going to expend calories, that's kind of almost, if there's pendulum of cardio versus strength training, now we've got the pendulum over here, kind of on strength training. And so, gosh, I just think about all the tools in the tool belt. I almost feel like as long as you take those things into consideration, there's a lot of tools there for a lot of different athletes to get a lot of different outcomes.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a whole line of...
Am I getting too big thinking?
No. It's all...
No. That's
it's good.
Because everything burns calories, so everything could
right.
be cardio.
Yeah.
So I think a good way to look at it is that we're getting a little bit into the realm of general pop training, which is different, like you were saying.
Yeah.
There's a whole line of research on circuit training where you train on machines or with free weights in a circuit fashion, never resting. And in the groups that it's used on, which is typically low training age level, not bodybuilders or powerlifters or strength athletes, it's just as effective as normal resistance training. Yet you're also getting the added benefit of getting a cardiovascular challenge while you do it. And I think that's kind of along the same lines of what Andrea was saying. Is, if I've got someone who is sure they have physique related goals, but their training age is really quite low, I can do basic fitness level, functional stability type of body weight exercises for, improving coordination and, intra and intramuscular control and burn calories, and it serves a dual purpose. So yeah, I think that's almost always the case, and that's in my mind, that's just being efficient.
Yeah. Another thing. Go ahead. Sorry. Damn, I suck at that.
I think, for the purpose of this podcast, it will rarely apply to a relatively well-trained bodybuilder or powerlifter. Their time in most cases is going to be better spent doing something else or just getting straight to the point, but not always.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is I think, and this is a non-cardio tangent, that the people I'm talking about aren't untrained or new to training. They're new to compound movements. Because we all know there's tons of people that will dumbbell and machine and smith their face off for years and years, decades even, but they're like, now I want to squat for real and I want to bench for real and whatever. And that's where I find that I'm surprised by how many people have been, quote unquote, in the game long enough and are terrible movers. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm just overly picky about terrible movers. So that might be a me thing too. But I just don't want it to seem like I have I'm actually not talking about Gen Pop is I think one of the things that surprised me on 3D, because it's been this year and a half now, is that you would think people coming to us with bodybuilding goals, they're not always incredible lifters. I don't know. That surprised me. I think that's a misconception.
There's a couple of schools of thought there. So let's say, you get someone who's been lifting for a while, but they have not done, free weights like you're talking about. So there's a risk. One is you just start them light, because the only reason you might do a lunge or a split squat with light weight is to improve their coordination so that they're safer when they squat.
Yeah.
But, probably what would also do that, and is even more specific to the task, would be squatting, but just light, so that the injury risk is low.
Yeah.
But that can be demotivating. But then again, so I think it's going to come down to the individual.
Yeah. How
quickly they learn things, what their weight training background is, and all that type of stuff. But I think I don't think necessarily just because someone is not good at free weights that you need to do something else before that necessarily. I think sometimes you just need to scale in conjunction. Sure. Yeah. I think sometimes, a lot of times, you can just scale the intensity.
Right. And like I said, it's just I keep defending this same thing, but it was the whole we always say context is key, right? It's someone who. A couple people who know they've been squatting for years, but maybe quarter squats or not full depth, or now they want to power lift, or now, before it was just leg press, that kind of stuff where it's when you do cardio a couple days a week, cool, and could that cardio also serve as stability training? And that's the instance in which I have been using it for these couple of people. And on to more cardio talk. Is there ever an instance where you would... have you ever taken someone to stage without cardio? Either of you guys? Okay. Will you tell me about that? What was that? Why did you, or do you even typically start someone prepping with a caloric deficit and cardio at the same time? Do you always do that?
Not always.
Okay.
Often I do. I'll give someone 1 or 2 sessions. Sometimes when I've got someone who just has a lot of calories to play with, I just don't do it at the start. And there's been 1 or 2 times now, maybe 3, where someone has a lot of calories to play with, and I just don't feel the need of starting them with cardio. And then I just never had to. It wasn't that intentional. The small cut I wanted to make, I wasn't to the point where I wanted to just add cardio. I looked up and I thought, you're 6 weeks out, we've never done any cardio. And I've had a person who's requested, hey, can we do some HIIT? I think that improves my glute striations. And I go, I think that's you. Every time you've competed, you've done HIIT and you've noticed that you get glute striations, but I think you would have got it regardless.
Yeah.
in that case, sometimes you just make them happy and give them one session of cardio anyway. But I think cardio is a useful tool during prep, and then for 90% of cases, there is a point where it becomes more beneficial than not having it in there. But it's not a requirement.
Right. Brad, have you ever gotten someone to the stage without cardio?
I'm trying hard to think, and I don't think so. Now, that being said, a lot of times we talk about compared to what, you know what I mean? So have I ever got anybody to the stage, in stage condition and competitive without doing any cardio at all, like nothing, that would be classified as cardio? I don't think so. Nothing comes to mind. But what does come to mind is that I had a very gifted bodybuilder quite many years ago who was a soccer player. Mm-hmm. And a large portion of his life was, basically soccer games and soccer practice. And so with him, we never added any other cardio at all. So that could actually be an instance where I got somebody competitive on the bodybuilding stage without cardio, because soccer and soccer practice was part of his life to begin with. And so when you compare what we did during prep to compare that to what we were doing, pre-life, there was no changes to his body that were done through additional expenditure. It was strictly through food.
Now, we've talked a lot about bodybuilders. In the context of bodybuilding, what are things that we've missed? Because I do want to talk about the use of it for powerlifting and performance and stuff like that.
There's a few things we haven't covered.
Go for it.
And before we get off this whole, is cardio needed or not, I think even though I've only done like a couple people without cardio ever, and Brad's only done one person raised and prescribed, I can count 10s, 20s of times where I've got someone to the stage with only 1 or 2 cardio sessions per week.
Yeah.
I
had a physique guy that we did 400 to 600 calories the entire time.
There you go. Exactly. I've done that a ton of times. My standard is like somewhere between 400 and 800 a week, and that's really very little. That could be done in one session if the person was large enough. Yeah. And so this kind of goes to show you it's not really a necessity. But it becomes useful so your food doesn't have to get too low, or when you want to make just a nudge in the right direction as a coach. I think it's a useful tool to have in your belt. Okay.
And tell me what we've missed.
I think another question that is in that top 10 list is low intensity steady state worse than HIIT for interference?
Okay.
We've talked about that separately. Talked about that. Okay. Yeah, but it is true that doing endurance training does create more interference than higher intensities. But that can't be looked at black and white, because I think a lot of people, when they hear endurance training, they think low intensity steady state, which endurance training is actually not low intensity steady state. It's much more like what bodybuilders consider moderate intensity steady state. Marathon running. That's like all the studies out there are basically on like people doing endurance athlete types of training, at a certain measurable amount of their percentage of their VO2 max. And that's not bodybuilders. We're on elliptical, walking the dog, maybe going on a jog, which is now approaching that. But most of the time, incline walking, elliptical, cycling, none of those things qualify as endurance training. If they're not actually promoting a cardiovascular endurance adaptation in a significant degree, then how could they be interfering? If you think about it from a very kind of mechanistic perspective. And then on the other side of it, if your HIIT is actually interfering with your weight training, like we talked about, if it's high impact, if it's sprinting and you're getting a hamstring strain, if it's preventing you from training effectively, it may not be interfering on a mechanistic level with your weight training adaptations, but it may be actually interfering with your ability to weight train effectively because you have a hamstring tear and you can't, do anything. So there are cases when the exact opposite could be true, that it would better be doing LISS than HIIT, because LISS is not endurance training, and HIIT is not always done in a format at an intensity or with a modality that is not harmful.
Do you guys ever specify I want lists and I want miss, and this is how I differentiate them?
Yes.
Okay. Brad?
Very rarely.
How do you differentiate them, Eric?
So I'll tell someone, if most of the time I'll just give them calorie burning, and I'll be when I give them calories burned, I say, look, I want this at a low intensity. You can do whatever you want, just avoid anything that's high impact, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, because this should be low intensity. Most of the time when I give cardio, I think about, hey, just burn calories, do what's fun, but don't make this high intensity. This shouldn't be hard. And then if I want them to do HIIT, I'll do it in a similar manner that you prescribed, Andrea. I'll give them, a certain number of sets, seconds on, seconds off, or I'll give them a barbell complex like I talked about before. So I may have them do cycling intervals, or I may have them do a barbell complex, and that is how I prescribe HIIT. It's a lot more specific. And when I give them just calorie burning, that's when it's what on paper is list, but I don't call it that. I just tell them burn calories.
Right. I do the same in that, like you said, but miss versus list. Did I say that wrong? Or that's what I meant to say if I didn't. That's what I said.
I don't know. I don't prescribe miss.
Okay. You just didn't listen to me, Helms, is what happened just now. That wasn't very nice.
Oh, I heard list. I heard, do I differentiate between list and HIIT?
List and miss. And you were like, yes. And I was like, oh, really? And then, like, you didn't.
Oh, yeah, I differentiate because I don't ever give miss.
Okay. No, because some people do, though.
Hmm.
Like, I've heard of coaches being like, you have this, like, 2 miss sessions and 2 list sessions. And I'm like, wow, okay, what for and how and why? Yeah. So I was wondering if either of y'all did that either.
Oh, my bad. So the whole time I thought you said list and HIIT, but no. I don't know why people are giving out missed sessions unless the person really just wants to do it.
That's what I'm saying. Well, okay, so I prefer, like you said, it's usually the bodybuilder doing, like, sometimes I'm on my phone, not giving a shit about what's going on. I just wait till it gets to 300 calories or whatever. There are, what I prefer most of the time, though, is I like to be slightly out of breath, and I like to get it done steady state as quickly as I can. Do you guys have problems with that? Have you ever asked someone to do that? If you're like, why is 300 calories taking you an hour and a half? Like, Have y'all ever noticed that? Is that ever a problem, or am I making shit up?
Gosh, that's a good question, because I'm never on their end. You know what I mean? I'm not there watching them, how they're burning those calories. I mean, most of the time, I just, I guess maybe I should classify a little bit better. But, I guess I assume, and maybe incorrectly, that they're at least getting out of breath. You know what I mean? Granted, if we're deep in prep and their energy levels are very, very low, maybe they're getting out of breath less and less. And, usually I kind of accommodate that kind of in the back of my mind. But yeah, maybe I'm incorrect. Maybe I'm assuming that when I say we're going to do 600-800 calories a week of cardio as part of our deficit, I'm assuming that they're doing something that at least gets them out of breath. Eric, I mean, it sounds like you're a little bit more descriptive in how you actually prescribe your cardio.
Just with HIIT. I'm the same way with misses or lists, rather. I just give a calorie burn, which is funny if you think about it, because if someone is really doing what Andrea said and taking an hour and a half to burn 300 calories, that's actually probably only like 1 calorie a minute more than they would have burned in that hour and a half normally.
Yeah, I've had a couple people.
Which before you continue, which means so if they went for 90 minutes to burn 300 calories, it's basically them slowly pedaling on a recumbent bike, and they'd be pedaling around the house or sitting on their ass. Mm-hmm. That's only like, if it's only 1 calorie a minute more they're burning, that's a 90 calorie burn. That's almost nothing, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think that might be one of the reasons why cardio at certain times in prep can seem like it doesn't do anything, if they're just totally lethargic about it.
I don't think I've ever told you this either. I have people, some people, I guess I could say that I think that I just want to check, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I'll have them report their times. Like, I want 3 sessions of 200 calories, and in this column of your sheet, tell me how long it takes you every week. And if it used to take them like 15 and now it takes them 30, it's like, okay, now we either need to have a talk or I'm dieting too hard, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. Now I'm thinking about how I do it as we talk about it. That maybe we need to start giving like a max time to completion. just to prevent it from being too.
I don't give max. I just want to know. And if I see some weird shit and it's taking you twice as long as it used to, that tells me I need to ask you, or yeah, you need more food, or I just like knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's sometimes
that's a.
Actually,
go ahead, Eric.
If we look at our spread, even though we don't say it, I think sometimes our spreadsheets have certain pieces of information in them that we don't really question anymore. Like if I look at my spreadsheets, a lot of the times it'll like calories burned per session, a number of sessions per week to get to the total.
Yeah.
And you can set that up in a way so that that's not crazy. Like if you go, okay, no more, it's 200 to 500 calorie burn per session, and you could add a little column that just says, must be done in less than an hour, and then you'd be covering all those bases that might be problematic for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, something else.
And probably periodically, I just was thinking to myself, even with the athletes that I have now, because there's a good 30 of them. Andrea, you just given me another little tool that I think that I'm going to utilize, and that's just do an audit every now and then. As a coaching adjustment, I might just tell the person, okay, this week I want you logging for me next to AM, PM, and how much you burned in your cardio. How long did it take you? Yeah. And then kind of track that, a little bit every so often. It's kind of a quick audit.
Yeah. Another thing. Damn it. What was it? It was in my head. I can interrupt y'all all I want, and when I try not to, I forget. That's why I'm interrupting all the time. It's because I lose it like this. Because I lose it.
So now are you justifying why you're doing the wrong things?
I'm trying to make me seem like less of an asshole. I'm trying to seem
okay to interrupt.
Less of an asshole. There was something else I was going to tell y'all that I do that I don't think I told y'all yet.
Burpees.
I do burpees, and what is the other thing? Emails and keeping pull-ups.
At the same time.
At the same time. Actually, I have burpee pull-ups sometimes. Those things are a bitch. You ever done those? Chest to the ground.
Why would I ever have done burpee pull-ups?
I don't know. Damn it. Oh, I know what it was. Okay. Something we haven't talked about yet, which is another little caveat I'll give some people sometimes, is you have to do 800 calories this week. If you're going to do 300 or more of those in one session, it can't be next to your weight training. It has to be a separate session. That's another rule I give out sometimes. So we haven't talked about, people are like, can I do it after, at the same time, before my workout, as a separate session? That's my rule. Generally, is if you're going to do 300 or more, I don't want it connected to your workout. Go take at least 2 hours off, is what I say.
Yeah, I normally say stuff like no more than 10 minutes prior to training, and then post-workout or on off days. Unless I'm giving them HIIT, then I may tell them to do it after their
and I don't say anything unless it becomes like a habit. Like if someone's already, like I don't mention it to start with, but if I'm like, this person's doing 400 and 500 calories right after their leg session, I'm like, okay, then we'll have the talk of like, hey, I want it separate. Or if they have like a weird schedule or whatever. But that's another thing that I try, because then it takes them way longer to do the 300 calories. And then we might be losing muscle and all that shit. Brad, you ever?
Maybe I just think way too black and white, because a lot of times I will just tell people, and keep in mind too, I use cardio sparingly, which is kind of our theme. We don't, we're not cardio coaches. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of the time, when we start our prep with cardio wise, we continue it like all the way through. And so, yeah, I guess maybe it's just kind of, I'm too abstract in that I don't care how you do it. Just get it done,
I don't
Obviously,
think that's bad.
I keep an eye on it. I keep an eye on it in their spreadsheets. I can kind of see, okay, they did 300 calories, 4 times a week this week for their 1,200. And I guess I never, unless there's some kind of a weird thing, like they decided to run like a 5K in the middle of their prep or something like that. And it's a rare instance. They burned all 1,200 calories in this one session, And
it becomes a non-issue, because then you just change their food more if it happens that they're doing this.
I think I'm just overly anal and excited. For real.
Which, I mean,
don't you give me that look, Helms. That was not a dirty joke.
You said anally excited.
Okay. Now Brad's lost it. Damn it.
I'm gonna lose it. Yeah. When I start
No,
laughing
I think
hysterically
it's just that I'm the new
table,
coach and I'm
I've
like,
lost it.
yeah, I think I like numbers and I like data and I can't help but also I never do it I monitor myself. I don't do it in like a thing that's going to ruin my athletes, but I do, um, because I'm a human, like things that I like, I'm like, maybe they'll like this, or things that I try, I'm like, maybe they'll want to try it, or things that I'm like, I remember I had that problem. This is how I dealt with it. And I think because I just have a very different athletic background than all of you guys, that I come in with like this weird shit, or these weird measurements, or because I'm a girl or whatever. Like I think that's just why I'm just a different. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and to be honest with you, I'm kind of almost the exact opposite of that, because as much as I like data and I like analyzing and I like numbers, there's certain times when if you throw too much at me all at once, I'll get stressed out and I can't make a decision. I mean, you guys kind of saw it right here in this episode where we're talking about all these different ways of strength training being considered cardio and cardio being considered strength training. And then that's the kind of stuff that I'll get thrown at me. And I'm like, oh my God, it's too much.
Yeah.
And that's probably just kind of our different styles, but it's always good to be aware, maybe
Yeah.
it is a good idea that I do an audit and I find out how much that, or how long it's taking them to do that, and yeah, maybe I do, kind of get a little bit of that control freak in me like Andrea and tell them I want them doing specific things this way. It's like you say, is it really going to hurt them? No, but it's always kind of nice to at least have the peace of mind.
Yeah. And I'm still always about like, are they having funsies if they can have fun, I'm down for it. Like if I can take away a 200 calorie list session and make them do planks and walking lunges and push-ups and stuff, like let's do it. Because that's what I like.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like Eric alluded to at the beginning of the podcast. It's like, first and foremost, lifestyle. If you don't want to do cardio, we'll make your entire deficit from food. If you want to eat as much as you can, we're going to do it within reason, but we'll give you as much cardio as we can get away with just to get the deficit we need.
Yeah. Well, and if someone doesn't have time, like if it's a really busy mom of 3 and whatever, and they can't get another session at the gym, what are things that we can do about that? Like Eric said, maybe every time you weight train, you do 10 minutes before kind of thing. So it doesn't have to be a separate session.
Yeah. If you understand all the principles we're talking about, then you can fit it to various different needs and lifestyles, which is, in my opinion, of critical importance when you're talking about 8-9 month prep sometimes, where you're doing multiple shows over a season.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep someone's got to keep themselves really in the game mentally. I think preserving some of that mental energy and happiness is pretty important for a contest prepper.
Yeah.
Even the really strong-willed ones, where they just go like, yeah, I did my one show, I'm good for the season. And they might have planned on doing 3.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that I guess we say it could go the other way. Like the people I'm talking about also that I like to do stuff with that are people that, again, do get bored, or they're the people that inherently like want a new program every 8 weeks, and you have to be like, nah, bro, like let's keep going. So that's another, I think, just important way of saying knowing your athlete. Like there are a lot of, especially dudes, where I'm like, just do this, and they're like, yeah, whatever, and we'll just do it day in and day out because they don't give a shit. Whereas the girl, oh, okay, it's testing week, so next time I want to do da-da-da-da. And I have to like reel them back in. So I like to have fun where I can have fun with them so that they're having fun, but at the same time, there are the machines out there that just want to get the work done because they see the end goal and that's all they need. And they want to do it the most efficient way possible. So I think personality matters.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, huge. Hey, if I could play moderator here for a second and kind of, ask you both you guys a question, and Eric, I'll kind of start with you. First is that, in relation to cardio and our powerlifters or our strength trainers, and what our good friend Mike Zerlos calls concurrent training. Kind of my standard procedure, according to what he taught us, is that I really don't want to incorporate cardio, or I think Mike calls it aerobic, actually, for much longer than about 6 weeks, because after 6 weeks, those studies that he kind of was analyzing and that he presented, it was a little bit of an attenuation of the strength progression. And then likewise, I really like to do what he said and kind of use cycling as that form of their aerobic exercise, because like he said, it kind of emulates the squat / deadlift, position of the hip flexor. Run with it. Thoughts? Am I right? Am I wrong? How can I make it better?
I think the big thing that you're referring to is the SBS Academy, the powerlifting unit.
Where I heard it.
Yep.
Yes.
Where Zerdos talks about the current training effects. Is basically as someone who's doing resistance training while also doing cardio. And this all goes back to interference that I was talking about before. So everything that I said previously still applies. If you look at the studies, cycling has typically reduced the interference effect. And that may be because of the body position, but I think it has much more to do with the fact there's no eccentric component. There's no impact. So that is shown a way to minimize interference. Also, the duration, like you said, duration and intensity. More so the duration, actually. The duration is related to the interference effects. So the longer you do cardio, in terms of the length of the session, and like you said, if you're doing more and more of it over a long period of time, then you think it'd have a increasingly negative effect. So yeah, I mean, with a pure strength athlete where their performance is resistance training, then you want to try to get away with minimal cardio, and if you do need to use it as a way to allow them to preserve food, then yeah, you want to do it in a way that has minimal impact and a minimal eccentric component. And cycling is certainly a reasonable way to do that.
So big question for you, and then Andrea, I'll kind of ask you a similar question.
Okay.
Since I do like to kind of compartmentalize and do it in like 6 and 8 week chunks, obviously as we take away the cardio, I could always take away, food at the same time. But I'm always kind of mindful, okay, we've lost this weight, we're within reach of this weight class. How would you account for that? We're going to take away our cardio now. How do we make sure that we don't get that weight going back on? Is it even a valid concern?
I think typically cardio is a pretty safe thing to take away. I mean, it depends on how lean they got. Like I find, like at the end of a prep, you can take away a huge chunk of someone's cardio, and they don't seem to gain the kind of weight you'd expect. I think that's just because their NEAT goes up. A lot of the times, anyone who's seen our recovery diet video, we will cut someone's cardio in half or remove it almost completely or only preserve 1 or 2 sessions and then increase their calories like 800. And they typically don't gain as much as we expect them to gain. And we have to bump it up again. So I think you're pretty safe if you've dieted a powerlifter down close enough to his weight class where you can just get it with an overnight fast and some water manipulation. I think just pulling it out is pretty reasonable, unless they're doing a huge amount of cardio, which they shouldn't be doing in the first place. So.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And now I've actually listening to you, I've almost kind of talked to myself or answered myself my own question, because we do oftentimes see NEAT go up when we add food back in. I think also, realistically speaking, how effective is their cardio? Toward the end of prep, are they really burning that many calories? I guess is kind of the other question. Is if we take it away, maybe the body's really not missing anything as far as a caloric burn goes, which is kind of another subject that we can get to in a second. But Andrea, my question for you is, since you're kind of on the flip side, whereas a lot of your quote unquote cardio is part of your sport specific, your sport specific training. Let's say that your coach said, okay, Andrea, this week we're gonna double your training volume. Would you then, having a piece of that aesthetic part in you, then think to yourself, I don't want to lose my gains, I'm going to increase my food? And if so, how would you go about it?
I would be starving, and I would eat more. It's actually when I started with my coach, although I still only trained 5 days a week, the amount of volume per session was like wildly different. I ate probably 2,400 to 2,600 calories a day the first couple months of grid. And now I probably train a little bit more than that. And I only eat like 1,900 to 2,100 most days. I don't know if that answers it.
That's a really good point that you brought up, is that you would eat more because you're hungry.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think anyone listening to this, you need to realize that 90% of the clients we're talking about, the situations we're talking about, they're tracking their macros and they're hitting them, which means that their food intake is going to be controlled for. If you're someone who's like, I don't got time for that, but you're trying to take lessons from what we're talking about, and you're not going to be tracking or controlling calorie intake, the normal thing that happens when you increase your energy expenditure
You get hungry.
is your body weight stays the same.
Yeah.
And you have to do, like, there's a huge range, if you look at studies on this, to where body weight is maintained in people who have a reasonable relationship with food. You can bring someone down to near sedentary and they won't gain weight. You can add a whole bunch of workload and they won't gain weight. But once you start getting to it won't gain weight. But once you start giving someone like manual labor levels of activity, then they do start to lose weight. They just can't, the body can't compensate that much. And likewise, if you take someone down to like crazy sedentary levels, they do start to gain weight because their hunger's not going to drop off that much. So yeah, the only way that cardio can be even as not as effective as food drops as we're talking about, but effective sort of, is when you are controlling for calorie intake.
Yeah.
If you're throwing additional cardio at yourself and expecting to lose weight without controlling your calories at all, you're probably just going to get in better aerobic shape and be frustrated at the lack of weight loss.
Yeah, which is what most females do anyways. But I think it's important also to note that when we say double training volume, that's not double cardio. That's like almost every single bit of my cardio is at least a 6 out of 10 intensity, besides like once or twice a week. It's hard to explain my training, but like, for instance, I can tell you what I did this evening.
Yeah.
Okay, for cardio this evening, I was a total of 20 minutes. I had 7 minutes to do as many rounds as I could. I had a 65-pound bar with thrusters, and I had pull-ups. And it was do 3 and 3, do 6 and 6, do 9 and 9, do 12 and 12. As many as go as up as high as I could for 7 minutes, 3-minute rest, and then I had 10 minutes on the rower, as many calories as possible. That was my session, my PM session. So it's 20 minutes total, but most of it I can't breathe. You know what I mean? So when we're talking my cardio or my type of training, it's very different than pretty much anyone that listens to the podcast, I would think. Very different than what we do with a powerlifter or a bodybuilder. So like if you took me from 400 calories of list to 800 calories of list a week, wouldn't be as different as if like I added 3 of what I just said a week. I would be way more hungry.
That is
Eric.
something you'll see in athletes is in certain parts of the season when they're playing a lot of games, doing a lot of practices, traveling, and especially if they also have to work. Those athletes do struggle to maintain weight in season, and you'll see like in American football, you'll often see body weights go down throughout the season, things like that. Not so much of not really relevant to powerlifters or bodybuilders, but there is a point where a high level of activity can overcome your ability to eat, just because for time, energy, financial issues sometimes can, for all these practical concerns.
Yeah. So I would
Hey,
definitely
Eric, big
eat
question. Well, and kind of in line with that, Eric, big question for you is, that was, in my opinion, that was a fairly, intense cardio session, kind of hit-ish. Now that she's sitting there, how many more calories do you think she's burning now as compared to when she got up this morning?
Oh, so the afterburn
Yeah.
effect. Yeah, that's
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually something that people ask a lot, because some of the earliest studies on high intensity intervals or high intensity training in general shows that there is a elevated resting energy expenditure after you do hit, and that's one of the reasons why it's amazing. Is in going high intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity in a hit format may burn the same amount of calories just doing moderate intensity the whole time. However, hit does an afterburn afterwards. It is there, it's true, but it's not nearly as much as the original studies suspected. It may be as much as 10% of the calories you burn. So if you had a 400 calorie hit session, that means you might only burn an extra 40 calories later that day. Unfortunately, the afterburn it's something, but it's not that substantial.
And it's probably going to take a good amount of time to even see that, right? Time as in weeks.
No, I mean the afterburn effect happens immediately, and it's not.
Yeah, correct.
It's just
Yeah,
it's
as
just
far
an
as
He
increase.
means cumulatively, like,
The effect of
like,
it.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like the tangible effects of weight loss slash fat loss.
Yeah, you probably won't notice it. It's not that it's not there. It's just our ability to detect it, and
To
then who are we
determine it is
comparing it
not. Yeah,
against? Yeah, exactly.
However,
yeah. Huh,
if even
interesting.
on a machine I did something like that, right? If I did 20 minutes at like a 7 out of 10 intensity versus 40 minutes at like a 4 out of 10 intensity, would that even create an afterburn, or would it need to be something like 10 minutes at a 9 out of 10 intensity? Does that make sense? Like, how intense does it need to be for that to even occur?
That 10% even occur. Yeah.
To be honest, that's not exactly my area. I don't know if there's an intensity threshold. I imagine it scales with the intensity,
Yeah.
the afterburn. That's the only thing that really makes sense. But what the afterburn effect actually is the fact that to get to a very high intensity quickly, you're using much less efficient energy systems. So for all of our high intensity, so basically the energy systems we use to produce a lot of energy right now have to get paid off by our slower energy systems. So our aerobic system produces a lot of energy, but over a long course of time. So for example, for me to just go sprinting just right now, I would have to, because basically all it is ATP getting recharged and recycled. I would have to then pay off that oxygen debt, or that energy debt, through having then ramping up for a period of time afterwards my aerobic energy system. So obviously if I just started moving, this isn't enough intensity for me to be able to create an afterburn effect, because it's just using that same low output but large amount over time system. So if that's kind of a convoluted way of explaining it, but yeah, it has to be a high enough intensity to where it costs you something later, or it's getting paid off for a period of time.
Well, and even then, you can take cycling to where it makes you puke. Like, we keep saying how cycling's low intensity, lower recovery, blah, blah, blah. But even a 15-second on, 45-second off isn't the same as, like, when I get on the assault bike and have to do, like, rounds and rounds of 10 calorie. Like, there's even varying effect or varying intensities of HIIT training. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, it can be hard in burning calories more efficiently, like we talked about earlier with prescriptions. But then there's things that, like, now I have to do where, like, I'm going to vomit. So
And that's a question I have for you, Andrew, because I've never experienced this assault bike thing before.
It's the worst thing in the world.
It's
the worst.
If you, I have done, like you talked about, on a cycle, 15 seconds sprinting, 45 seconds cycling, 15 seconds sprinting, 45 seconds cycling, which I think you have too, correct?
Yeah.
So if you were to assign an RPE of the assault bike to that form of interval training, just out of curiosity for myself, assign an RPE for those two.
It's different in that the assault bike pushes you back the harder you push it. Does that make, like, you know how when you're on an upright bike and it's hard, but once you start going really, really fast, it kind of like goes on its own? Does that make sense? This doesn't. The assault bike has something in it to where it pushes, like, back at you. Like, if I go and the equations roll jacked up on it, like, it can take me, if I'm going all out to do 10 calories as fast as I can, the first calorie might take me 8 seconds, but the full 10 would take me 18. Like, it for some reason, the harder you go, the more it gives you calories. Like, the equation just doesn't make sense compared to any other cardio piece you've been on, or cardio piece of equipment. I don't know enough about it. I know it makes me want to vomit all the time. That's all I know.
Yeah.
Not my
Because I mean, like, when I do HIIT on a cycle, at least my remembrances of doing HIIT in that format on a cycle, I would give it an RPE of 10. It sucks.
Yeah, and this is like this way
I'm
too.
just trying to get an idea of what the assault bike might feel like.
I'm not very good at it, to be honest. I don't know. It's hard.
But obviously, you feel like it's burning a lot more calories. Would you say?
I would think, because it's really different. No, I mean, I think. Okay, here's the thing with that, right? Talking about machines, I actually do think it is, but on the readout, it's like doesn't favor you. It's an asshole. Mm-hmm. But as far as what I'm putting into it, yeah. Like it has the way that I like 10 calories on a side bike could take me like 20 seconds all out as hard as I can, but which doesn't even make sense. That's not possible. Is that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it like literally, when we do training for calories on a assault bike, it's very different than training for calories like on an elliptical or a rower. It doesn't make sense. It exponentially gives you so much more if you're like at all out pace, but if you're just a little slower, it takes it away like crazy. So it doesn't make sense. I don't know.
Oh my gosh. I don't want to play with it.
Yeah, it's fun to play with, but not.
I respect, girl.
We only talked about it once though. The whole powerlifting. Y'all talked about prescribing it in blocks and how would you do it and all that. I want to not leave without talking about powerlifters and how y'all utilize cardio.
I honestly don't think it's any different.
Only for weight class, though. Like, you wouldn't keep it in just for physical fitness because they suck at something. I don't know.
If they are... No, I mean, if they're in such bad shape that you need to add cardio, then, like, they're in danger of having, like, a heart attack. You know, like, don't be so lazy, you know? Like, like if you need it for general health, like, if you've got, like, a super heavy powerlifter who trains with low volume and rests 10 minutes between sets... then yeah, you make them do it because they're lazy and they're going to die, you know, at 45. But yeah, no, I mean the rules for bodybuilding or powerlifting are the same. Dieting, you want to keep it as minimally in there as possible either way, but doing what you need to do to get to a lower weight class, just kind of the same way that a bodybuilder would only do the amount of cardio they need, and then you'd want what interferes the least amount. I don't really think it's all that different.
Word, but and you guys referring to Zordos's presentation and trying to maybe 6 to 8 weeks at the max, but not having it as something long term, even though y'all both in our powerlifting episode talked about how sometimes you will have a pretty lengthy, slow dieting phase so it doesn't interfere with the lifter's strength.
Yeah, typically, that's one thing, though, actually. I'm much less likely to start with cardio for a powerlifter than a bodybuilder.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So powerlifters don't need to get as lean, and I just feel like there's more ways to roam, and there's less stress to get there. I'm rarely dieting someone down for a powerlifting meet where they're getting, like, as lean as a bodybuilder does. That's probably just not a good weight class to be at for that person, you know? If they're going to get lean-ish, you know, like I remember way back in the day, Bryce actually competed in the 165s as a junior. But he was not as lean as he was like when I met him in 2009 when he did the bodybuilding comp for me. He was probably like 9 or 10% body fat, but he wasn't like 6 or 7% body fat, you know?
Right.
And yeah, so even that, it's stressful, but it's not as bad. I mean, Brad can speak to that. I know he's competed in the 165s and also
the 162s, the 74 kg. Yeah,
that's right, 74 kg, which is like what, 5 pounds over your stage weight.
About, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I cannot imagine.
Yeah, it's not as shredded, but it's still pretty low.
Yeah. I mean, I think 2 months later I was in posing, what do they call it, guest posing condition. So it still is not competitive bodybuilding condition. Yeah. And I'm like Eric, you know,
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. No, I can piggyback easy. Unlike Andrew, I can remember.
I was just going to say, one other thing when you're dieting a powerlifter down to compete 5 pounds over stage weight, that's also 5 pounds over stage weight with a few pounds dropped from,
water weight,
fasting the night before, water weight, and then rehydrating the last 2 hours. You know, we do that pretty minimally compared to others, but that might be another 4 or 5 pounds, which 4 or 5 pounds of body mass, true body fat loss, is a huge effect on you when you're like in single digits already. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those, am I still here, you guys?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. For those powerlifters that are looking to just basically drop weight because maybe they're uncomfortable in their own skin, or maybe it's a long prep and they're looking to drop a weight class like a year or so from now. I'm like Eric in that I'm not going to prescribe any cardio right off the bat. I'm going to do it very much like I do it. We're going to take 2 days. We're going to go into a 500 calorie deficit. There's 1,000 calories. That's a third of a pound approximately in 1 week. And I'm going to start with that. I'm going to run with that for as long as it works. All the other days maintenance, or maybe even kind of like we do with our tier system, maybe just ballparking and tracking, 2 days deep deficit, and then maybe later on down the road when we started making maybe 3 days deficit or 4 days deficit, maybe then we can start incorporating cardio. Then it doesn't matter. I mean, we don't even really have to necessarily quantify calories for calories. It's just the fact we've gone none cardio to now there's, like we said, some.
Yeah.
And that sometimes works for a good long time, very, very predictably. I mean, may it not be linear. It might be a pound and a half this week or a half a pound that week, but still the trend is that body weight is going down and strength is being maintained and sometimes even going up.
Yeah. I think that's a really good, message to end on, is that we can use all these tools. There's a bazillion ways to do it, but more importantly, what's your baseline, and are you adding cardio in a way to make that different to create changes? And if it's not, then there's just that forever feedback loop. I mean,
Boom.
Boom. Anything else, y'all?
I think that's it.
Alrighty. Good one, dudes. I'll talk to y'all next
so.
week.
Yeah.
See ya.